My name is Sarah, and for 10 years, I was not just a wife. I was the chief architect and devoted curator of a life I believed to be a masterpiece. It was a life built on the bedrock of what I thought was unshakable love, a shared vision with my husband, Mark. Our home, a stately two-story colonial nestled in a quiet, maple-lined cul-de-sac in the affluent suburbs of West Hartford, Connecticut, was more than just brick and mortar. It was our sanctuary, a tangible manifestation of our shared dreams. I can still recall the specific, golden afternoon light filtering through the large bay window as we argued playfully over paint swatches. We spent an entire weekend debating, holding up strips of color until we landed on the perfect sage green for the living room, a shade that seemed to breathe with the morning sun. His study, by contrast, was a deep, contemplative navy, a color he chose because it made him feel, in his words, like a captain of industry. It was in that room, under the warm, focused glow of a green glass banker's lamp, that he built his formidable career as a corporate lawyer, a man whose easy charm was the velvet glove over an iron fist of legal intellect, and I was his partner in every sense. I had my own thriving freelance graphic design business, a passion I'd nurtured from a college hobby into a successful career, from a sun-drenched spare bedroom that overlooked our garden. My work gave me an identity that was solely my own, yet it afforded me the flexibility to be the supportive spouse his demanding career required. We were a team. We were the couple our friends pointed to as the ideal, the ones who hosted Thanksgiving with effortless grace, the ones who seemed to have cracked the code to a happy, successful life. Every spring, without fail, we would dedicate a weekend to the garden. I loved the feeling of plunging my hands into the cool, dark, fragrant soil, the shared labor of creating beauty. We'd laugh, our faces smudged with dirt, as we debated the precise placement of the peonies versus the hydrangeas. He would always defer to me in the end, saying, "You're the artist, Sarah. You know best." Just last fall, we had taken a trip to Vermont to see the foliage, a pilgrimage we made every few years. I remember one particularly crisp evening, the air smelling of wood smoke and decaying leaves. We were sitting in front of a roaring fire in a historic inn, mugs of mulled cider warming our hands. He turned to me, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames, and took my hand. "This is it, Sarah," he said, his voice low and sincere. "This right here. This is all I'll ever need." I believed him with every fiber of my being. His words were the foundation upon which I was building our future. The next chapter was supposed to be a family. The room at the top of the stairs, the one with the best morning light, was already a nursery in my mind. A soft, buttery yellow, with a whimsical mural of woodland creatures I planned to paint myself. It was all so close, so tangible. I could almost hear the sound of a child's laughter echoing in the halls. That life, that painstakingly curated masterpiece of love, trust, and shared ambition, was systematically bulldozed and set ablaze on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday morning. The air in our kitchen, usually a comforting blend of freshly brewed coffee and toasted sourdough, felt strangely heavy. Mark, running late for an early deposition in a high-stakes case, had rushed out the door with a hurried kiss to my cheek. But in his haste, he had committed an act so profoundly out of character, it felt like a glitch in the matrix. He had left his phone on the polished granite of the kitchen island. This phone was his lifeline, a sleek black rectangle that was a veritable extension of his arm, a constant conduit of emails, texts, and calls that connected him to his powerful world. Seeing it lying there, silent and abandoned, was deeply unsettling, like finding a single pristine wing where a bird should be. My first thought was to grab it and run out to the driveway, but the deep, throaty rumble of his BMW was already fading down the street. I shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture to reassure myself. He would survive. As I turned to pour myself a cup of coffee, the phone's screen lit up, casting a cool blue-white glow across the dim morning kitchen. A single text message notification had appeared. My heart performed a strange, complicated flutter, a discordant note in the quiet symphony of my morning routine. It wasn't full-blown suspicion, not yet. It was a more primal, instinctual prickle of unease, a silent alarm bell chiming in a distant, forgotten part of my soul. I told myself to turn away, to respect his privacy, the sacred, unspoken contract of our marriage. It's just a colleague, I reasoned, the voice of my trusting self, or a spam text about his car's extended warranty. But another voice, a colder, more cynical one I hadn't heard in years, whispered back, "Then why does your stomach feel like you just swallowed a stone?" I stood paralyzed for what felt like an eternity, the steam from my coffee mug rising in a lazy spiral, my own internal debate raging. To pick up that phone was a violation, a step across a line I had never imagined crossing. It was an admission of doubt, but to walk away from it, that felt like a deliberate act of ignorance, a choice to remain willingly blind. With a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, a tremor that started deep in my chest, I reached out and picked it up. The phone felt unnaturally heavy in my palm, as if weighted with the gravity of a future I could not yet see. My thumb hovered over the glowing screen, a tiny, simple movement that I knew, with a chilling, absolute certainty, was the fulcrum upon which my entire existence was about to pivot. My life was about to be cleaved in two, the before and the after. I tapped the screen. The message was brief, composed of only a handful of words, but it detonated in the quiet kitchen with the force of a tactical nuclear weapon, vaporizing the world I knew. It read, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again, babe." The world went utterly, profoundly silent. The familiar, comforting tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound so constant it was like the house's own heartbeat, ceased to exist. The rich aroma of coffee vanished. The only sound I could perceive was the frantic, panicked thundering of my own blood in my ears, a frantic drumbeat of doom. Babe. The word was a foreign object, a piece of shrapnel lodged in my brain. Mark never, ever used that word. He called me Sarah, his own special name for me. He called me my love in his softer moments. Babe was the lexicon of strangers, of cheap flirtations, of a life I knew nothing about, and the winking emoji that followed it. It was a digital leer, a punctuation mark of such profound sleaze that it made my skin crawl with a visceral psychic revulsion. A glacial tide of coldness washed through me, starting in my toes and rising until my entire body felt encased in ice. My hands began to shake so violently that I had to place the phone back on the counter, afraid I would drop it. I stumbled backwards until I hit the refrigerator, the cold, unyielding metal a stark contrast to the bonfire of humiliation that was beginning to rage in my cheeks. Some desperate, logical part of my brain was still scrabbling for an innocent explanation. A wrong number, a bizarre spam text, a friend playing a stupid prank. I forced my shaking fingers to tap on the sender's information, praying for an unfamiliar string of digits, for anything that would allow me to put this monster back in its box. But the prayer went unanswered. The contact was saved in his phone, a name that acted as the final, brutal executioner of my hope. Jessica, client. Jessica. The name was a specter that had been lingering at the periphery of my life for weeks. The brilliant, ambitious tech entrepreneur, he'd called her, the wunderkind with the disruptive new app. He had spoken of her with a certain professional admiration, praising her intellect, her tenacity. He had told me, with what I now recognized as a breathtaking sociopathic casualness, about a late-night working dinner with her the previous week, a necessary evil to hammer out the final, complex details of an intellectual property agreement. I had pictured them in a sterile, glass-walled conference room, surrounded by legal pads and binders. I had even packed him a thermos of his favorite chamomile tea to help him stay focused through the long night. I had waved to him from the doorway of our beautiful home, the perfect, supportive, trusting wife. The memory now played in my mind as a scene of my own abject foolishness. My trust had not been the foundation of our marriage. It had been the camouflage for his betrayal. I collapsed onto a kitchen stool, the beautifully designed, sun-drenched room, my favorite room in the house, suddenly feeling like a prison cell. I couldn't seem to draw a full breath. My lungs felt tight and constricted, as if a physical band was tightening around my chest. My 10-year marriage, my entire adult life, began to unspool before my eyes like a corrupted, flickering film. Every late night at the office, every last-minute business trip to Chicago or D.C., every time he had seemed emotionally distant, and I had tiptoed around him, assuming the weight of his career was pressing down on him. It all replayed, each memory now recontextualized, each one a flashing red warning light I had been too naive, too trusting, too in love to see. I spent the rest of that day in a surreal, muted fog, an automaton going through the motions of life. I was a ghost haunting the rooms I had so lovingly decorated. I caught my reflection in the ornate hallway mirror, a gift from his parents for our 5th anniversary, and I didn't recognize the pale, haunted woman with the wide, terrified eyes staring back at me. The gallery of photos we had created on the wall leading up the stairs, us laughing on a windswept beach in Mexico, him kissing me passionately under the Eiffel Tower, our beaming, hopeful faces on our wedding day. They were no longer cherished memories. They were artifacts from a fraudulent civilization, evidence of a massive, decade-long crime of which I was the sole victim. I tried to lose myself in a design project for a new client, a cheerful, optimistic logo for a local bakery, but the vibrant colors on my high-resolution monitor seemed to bleed together into a muddy, joyless gray. The clean, crisp lines of the vectors I was creating blurred and swam through a shimmering film of unshed tears. The betrayal wasn't just an emotional concept. It was a physical entity, a leaden, toxic weight pressing down on my chest, making it impossible to think, to create, to function, to breathe. When I heard the familiar deep crunch of his BMW's tires on the gravel driveway that evening, a jolt of pure animalistic panic shot through me, so intense it made me gasp. I scrambled to compose myself, splashing cold water on my face in the downstairs powder room, willing the redness and puffiness from my eyes. I had no script for this scene. I felt like an unprepared actor thrust onto a hostile stage, the spotlight blindingly hot. He walked in, smiling that easy, handsome smile that had once been the center of my universe, and leaned in to kiss me on the cheek. I flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible recoiling of my body, but if he noticed, he gave no sign. The touch of his lips, a daily ritual of comfort and connection for 10 years, now felt like the brand of a hot iron, searing his lie into my skin. "Hey, Sarah, what a day," he said, loosening his expensive silk tie as he dropped his leather briefcase by the door with a weary thud. "Anything interesting happen in the quiet world of suburbia today?" The bitter, black irony of his question was so thick I could have choked on it. I managed to shake my head and mumble something about leftovers, my voice sounding thin and foreign to my own ears. I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes, terrified that he would see the apocalyptic devastation raging behind them, the raw knowledge that would burn our carefully constructed world to the ground. He seemed to sense my quietness, but he attributed it to fatigue. "You look tired," he said, with a maddeningly casual concern. "Long day?" He headed for his study to fire off a few last emails before dinner, and I felt a knot of pure, unadulterated rage tighten in my stomach. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of him to carry on this charade in our home, to walk on the floors we chose together, under the roof that was supposed to be our sanctuary. Later that night, the familiar sound of the shower starting up from our master bathroom, a mundane, domestic sound, now signaled my opportunity. The question of whether or not to invade his privacy further was no longer a moral quandary. He had forfeited that right. He had already desecrated the most private, most sacred space of all, the vows and intimacy of our marriage. I crept into his study, my bare feet silent on the cool, hardwood floors. His phone was on the desk, plugged in and charging, its screen dark. My heart hammered a frantic, suffocating rhythm against my ribs, a mixture of terror and a grim, righteous determination. With hands that felt like they belonged to someone else, I picked up the phone and unlocked it. His passcode, our anniversary date, was a cruel joke. I navigated straight to his text messages, to the thread with Jessica, client. I thought I had prepared myself for the worst. The reality was a circle of hell I hadn't even imagined. It wasn't just a flirtation. It was an epic novel of deceit. A fully fledged emotional and physical affair, chronicled in thousands of words of excruciating detail. They had pet names for each other. He called her Jessie. She called him my counselor. They had inside jokes, shared intimacies, references to clandestine meetings at boutique hotels in Hartford, and quiet, expensive lunches in New Haven. He sent her links to indie songs that he said reminded him of her. Songs I recognized. Songs we had once danced to in this very living room. Songs he had once called ours. She sent him an endless stream of selfies, pouting in her car, smiling seductively from a hotel bed. And he had replied with a barrage of fire emojis and breathless compliments about her beauty, her brilliance, her spirit. Compliments he hadn't given me in years. The most painful, the most soul-destroying, were the emotional declarations. "Being with you makes me feel alive again," one of his texts to her read. Another, sent just a few weeks ago, said, "I feel like I can finally be my true self with you. No masks, no pretense." His true self. So who was the man who came home to me every night? A carefully constructed performance? An elaborate, decade-long lie? I scrolled back, a nauseous, dizzying sensation overwhelming me, and found a message sent the day after our 10th wedding anniversary. I had thrown him a surprise party, inviting all our friends. I had given him a vintage Omega watch, a piece he'd been coveting for years. The next day, he had texted her, "Last night was tough. So much obligation, so much pretense. Felt like I was suffocating, counting the absolute minutes until I can see you and breathe again." A guttural sob escaped my throat, and I had to clamp my hand over my mouth, biting down on my knuckle to stifle the sound. I was the pretense. My love was the obligation. Our life together was the cage from which she was his escape. The love I had held for him, the deep, foundational, load-bearing pillar of my entire adult life, was rapidly and irrevocably transmuting into something else entirely. A cold, hard, razor-sharp desire for not just justice, but for retribution. I did not confront him. I was beyond that now. A confrontation would only lead to a cascade of pathetic lies, manipulative gaslighting, and empty, insulting promises to change. I was done with his words. I needed action. I retreated to the vast, cold emptiness of the guest bedroom, the sheets feeling like ice against my skin, the room a sterile antechamber to my new life. Sleep was a distant, unattainable country. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their words, their pet names, his casual cruelty. But through the thick, suffocating haze of pain, a single, crystal-clear thought began to form, solidifying from the chaos. This would not be the end of my story. This would be the beginning of the end of his. The first gray, unforgiving light of dawn was just beginning to streak the sky when I picked up my phone, my fingers moving with a newfound purpose. The grief was still there, a raw, physical ache in my chest, but it was now overlaid with a thick, protective layer of icy resolve. I called Emily. She answered on the second ring, her voice instantly alert, as if she had been waiting for my call. "Sarah? Are you okay?" I took a shaky breath, the air rattling in my lungs. "I know everything, Em," I said, my voice low and steady. "It's worse than I could have possibly imagined. It's a whole other life, a whole other person." I told her everything, the story pouring out of me in a torrent of whispered, furious words, the hundreds of messages, the pet names, the cruel lies about our anniversary, the depth and breadth of his deception. Emily listened, her silence on the other end of the line not empty, but heavy with a shared, supportive fury. When I was finally done, my throat raw, her voice was low and dangerous. "That man is not a man. He is a monster, a narcissistic, pathological liar in a bespoke suit." "Okay, Sarah, listen to me very, very carefully. The time for tears is over, for now. Now, we go to war. You are not going to let this man burn your life to the ground and walk away with a box of matches and a smirk. You are going to take everything he values. You are going to take the house, the money, and his reputation. But to do that, you have to be smarter than him. You have to be more strategic." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice a whisper, feeling like a soldier receiving her orders. "You call the lawyer I told you about, Evelyn Reed. Not tomorrow, not this afternoon. Now. You make an appointment for today if you can. And until you see her, you do not say a single word to Mark. You become Meryl Streep. You smile, you make him his goddamn coffee. You are the perfect, supportive, oblivious wife. You are a ghost. You are a spy in your own house. You gather information. Can you do that for me, Sarah? Can you be that strong?" "Yes," I said, and for the first time, I believed it. A spark of her fire had caught onto the kindling of my rage. "Yes, I can do that." I made the call. Driving into Hartford for my 1 o'clock appointment with Ms. Reed felt like crossing behind enemy lines. Her office, on the 30th floor of the Goodwin Square building, was a fortress of quiet, intimidating power. The panoramic view of the Connecticut River and the historic old State House seemed to belong to a different world, a world of order and consequence that felt a million miles from the chaos of my life. Evelyn Reed herself was exactly as Emily had described. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a presence that was both profoundly calming and utterly formidable. Her office was a reflection of her personality, minimalist, elegant, and serious. No family photos, just abstract art and shelves lined with leather-bound law books. I sat in the plush leather chair across the vast mahogany desk from her and laid out the whole sordid, ugly story. I was clinical, detached, recounting the facts as if they had happened to someone else, pushing the overwhelming pain down to a place where it couldn't derail me. I told her about the discovery of the texts, the secret phone sessions in his study, the financial documents I had already started photographing on my phone late at night. She listened without interruption, her gaze never leaving my face, her expression a careful mask of professional empathy. She made meticulous, precise notes on a yellow legal pad, her pen scratching softly in the quiet room. When I finished, she looked at me for a long, contemplative moment. "Sarah," she said, her voice a calm, steady anchor in the hurricane of my emotions. "First, I want to acknowledge the immense courage it took for you to walk in here today and lay all of this out so clearly. What you are going through is a profound trauma, a betrayal of the highest order. But what you have also done, by acting so quickly and gathering this preliminary evidence, is give us a powerful, almost insurmountable, strategic advantage." She then spent the better part of an hour demystifying the arcane world of Connecticut divorce law. She spoke of concepts like equitable distribution, alimony, the discovery process, and forensic accounting. She explained that while the state was technically no fault, a judge had significant discretion to penalize a spouse for egregious conduct that led to the breakdown of the marriage. "His infidelity is a significant factor," she explained, leaning forward. "But the deliberate, systematic nature of the deception, the sheer callousness of it, and the potential squandering of marital assets on his affair. That is what a judge will find truly reprehensible. We will subpoena everything. His phone records, his credit card statements, his work emails, his travel itineraries, his E-Z-Pass records. We will create a timeline of his deceit so detailed, so undeniable, that he will have no room to lie, no corner to hide in. As she spoke, laying out the legal battle plan, I felt the last vestiges of the heartbroken, victimized wife fall away, replaced by a cold, determined warrior. "What's the next step?" I asked, my voice clear and hard. Evelyn's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "There is one more step you need to take immediately, and I apologize in advance for its necessity. His reckless behavior in his personal life often indicates a pattern of recklessness in all areas. For your own peace of mind, for your physical well-being, and frankly, for the unassailable strength of our case, I strongly advise you to get a full medical screening. That includes a comprehensive STD panel." The suggestion, as clinical and professional as it was, hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs, and the room seemed to tilt on its axis. Of all the cascading horrors of the past few days, this was a violation I hadn't even allowed myself to contemplate. It was a level of degradation, of personal defilement, that felt almost surreal. He hadn't just shattered our life together. He had potentially used my body as a vector for disease. He had treated our shared intimacy, the most sacred part of our marriage, with a level of disrespect that was almost incomprehensible. I left her office in a silent, horrified trance, her words echoing in my mind like a funeral dirge. That afternoon, I made the appointment with my doctor. The drive to the familiar, friendly clinic now felt like a walk of shame. The waiting room, usually a place of comfort, felt hostile. I felt every eye on me. I felt tainted, dirty, marked by his betrayal in a way that I could never wash off. The visit itself was a blur of fluorescent lights, cold instruments, and the kind but necessarily intrusive questions of the nurse practitioner. I felt profoundly alone, deeply humiliated, a casualty in a war I didn't even know was being waged against me. The week I spent waiting for the test results was the longest, most agonizing week of my life. I was living in a state of suspended animation, a constant, low-grade, humming terror just beneath the surface of my skin. I continued to play the role of the perfect wife, smiling, cooking his favorite meals, and sleeping in the guest room under the guise of a lingering head cold. He seemed to buy it, or perhaps he was simply too consumed by his own secret life to pay me much attention. It was a week of living on a knife's edge, every ring of the phone sending a jolt of panic through me. The call came on a gray, drizzly Friday afternoon. I was in my garden, listlessly pulling weeds, trying to find some semblance of peace among my wilting roses, when my phone buzzed. It was my doctor's office. My heart stopped. I walked to the far end of the yard, behind the old oak tree, my hand trembling as I answered. The doctor's voice was kind, professional, but the message she delivered was a second, even more devastating detonation in my already ravaged world. I had tested positive for chlamydia. I sank to my knees on the damp grass, the phone slipping from my numb fingers and landing silently in the dirt. A sound escaped my throat, a raw, wounded, guttural cry that was barely human. It was the sound of the absolute, final, irrevocable death of any lingering shred of hope or love, or even pity I might have harbored for the man I had married. He had given me a disease, a physical, cellular manifestation of his betrayal. The violation was absolute. It had invaded my body, a permanent, biological reminder of his infidelity. The tears that followed were not tears of grief. They were tears of pure, white-hot, cleansing rage. I stayed on my knees in the garden for a long, long time, The cool, damp earth beneath me, the only solid, real thing in a world that had dissolved into a nightmare. When I finally, shakily, stood up, the world looked different. The colors were sharper. The air was colder. I was no longer just fighting for my financial future or for a principle. I was fighting for my honor, for my health, for my very self. My first call was to Evelyn. I told her the diagnosis, my voice a low, shaking tremor of controlled fury. The silence on her end of the line was heavy and profound. It was a silence that gathered power. When she finally spoke, her voice was stripped of all professional warmth, replaced by the cold, hard, lethal tone of a predator that has just caught the scent of blood. "Sarah," she said, her voice like flint striking steel. "This is the nail in his coffin. This elevates his actions from mere infidelity to the level of reckless endangerment and battery. This is a personal injury claim, and we will pursue it as such within the divorce proceedings. A judge will be absolutely, unequivocally appalled. We are going to destroy him in that courtroom. We are going to take him for everything he has and everything he ever hopes to have. Now, your job is to remain calm, to continue your performance, and to gather every single piece of financial information you can possibly find. We need to be ready to strike with overwhelming force." And so began the Quiet War, a period of surreal, high-stakes domestic espionage. I became a master of deception, a ghost in my own home. By day, I was the placid, supportive, slightly unwell wife. By night, I was a forensic investigator, my fury honed to a laser focus. I combed through his study, his briefcase, his car, the pockets of his expensive suits. I photographed every bank statement, every credit card bill, every receipt. I discovered a secret American Express card he used exclusively for his affair, a charge for a lavish dinner for two at Mac's downtown, a weekend stay at the ridiculously expensive Mayflower Inn and Spa, a receipt for a diamond tennis bracelet from a boutique in Greenwich that certainly wasn't for me. Each receipt was another piece of the puzzle, another nail in his coffin, a testament to the staggering breadth of his lies. The emotional toll of this double life was immense. We had to attend his parents' 40th anniversary party, a night of excruciating forced smiles and stilted, meaningless conversation. I had to endure his mother's well-meaning but painful questions about when we were going to give her grandchildren. I watched Mark charm the room, accepting compliments on what a wonderful, stable couple we were, and I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to retreat to the bathroom and grip the sink, my knuckles white, just to keep from screaming. I looked at my reflection in the ornate bathroom mirror and saw a woman I barely recognized, her eyes filled with a chilling, unsettling combination of profound pain and cold, calculating cunning. The biggest, most damning discovery came late one night, about 3 weeks into my secret investigation. I was searching his deep filing cabinet for our old tax returns when my fingers brushed against a folder tucked deep in the back, behind a decade's worth of paperwork. It was mislabeled, almost comically, "Old Client Notes." My intuition, now a finely honed survival instinct, screamed at me. I pulled it out. My hands were shaking again. Inside were not notes, but monthly statements from a brokerage firm I'd never heard of, Charles Schwab. It was an investment account solely in his name. I began to scan the transaction history, and my blood ran cold. For the past 8 months, there had been a systematic, methodical pattern of large monthly electronic transfers, $10,000, $15,000, sometimes 20, moving from our joint savings account, our nest egg, into this secret, hidden fund. He wasn't just hiding his affair. He was hiding our money. He was systematically draining our shared resources, our future, our children's future, into an account he thought I would never find. He was building a getaway fund, a nest egg for his new life with Jessica, a life funded by my half of our shared marriage. The audacity, the sheer, calculated, sociopathic cruelty of it stole the breath from my lungs. I photographed every single page, my hands steady now, my purpose absolute and unwavering. I sent the encrypted images to Evelyn with a simple 3-word message. I have him. Her reply was instantaneous. It was a single sentence that sealed his fate. Yes, you do. It's over for him. It's time to unleash the hounds. The day the process server was scheduled to arrive was a cool, overcast Wednesday morning. I was in my studio, pretending to work, every nerve ending in my body tingling with a mixture of terror and electrifying anticipation. I heard the familiar chime of the doorbell echo through the silent house. I heard Mark's confident, unsuspecting footsteps on the stairs, the sound of the heavy front door opening, a brief, muffled exchange of male voices. Then, a long, profound silence. It stretched for what felt like an eternity, a silence so heavy it seemed to have a physical weight. Then I heard a sound that I will never forget for as long as I live, the sharp, violent, tearing sound of a thick envelope being ripped open in a fit of rage. His footsteps thundered up the stairs, no longer confident, but heavy with fury. He burst into my studio without knocking, his handsome face contorted into a grotesque mask of fury and disbelief. He was waving the legal documents, the thick sheaf of papers that represented the end of his world, in his hand. Sarah, what is the meaning of this? What in God's name have you done? I stood up slowly from my chair, feeling strangely, preternaturally calm, as if I were an actress who had been rehearsing for this one pivotal scene her entire life. I had played this moment over in my mind 1,000 times, and I knew my lines perfectly. I'm divorcing you, Mark, I said, my voice even and as cold as the grave. Divorcing me? He sputtered, his eyes wide with a comical, arrogant shock. On what grounds? You can't be serious. This is insane. Oh, I'm deadly serious, I replied, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. I'm divorcing you on the grounds of adultery, a long-term, calculated affair with your client, Jessica Albright. I'm divorcing you on the grounds of reckless endangerment and battery for knowingly and negligently giving me a sexually transmitted disease. And, for good measure, I am divorcing you on the grounds of felony-level financial fraud for systematically stealing over $100,000 of our marital assets and deliberately hiding it in a secret, illegal brokerage account. Each charge was delivered like a precision-guided missile, and I watched with a grim satisfaction as each one hit its mark. I watched the color drain from his face, the blustering rage collapsing into the pale, clammy sheen of pure, unadulterated panic. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in what felt like years, and the quiet, accommodating, predictable wife he thought he knew was gone. In her place stood a stranger, an adversary who held all of his secrets, all of his sins, in her hands. He began to stammer, to deny, to grasp at pathetic straws. The account, that's not what it looks like. It's a misunderstanding. The affair, Sarah, it meant nothing. It was a stupid, meaningless mistake. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I let out a short, sharp, humorless laugh that sounded brittle and strange in the quiet room. A mistake, Mark? A mistake is forgetting to put the cap back on the toothpaste. A mistake is not what you did. You orchestrated a systematic campaign of lies, deceit, and betrayal. You desecrated our marriage, our home, and my body. There is nothing to misunderstand. There is nothing left to fix. So get a lawyer, a very, very good one, because I have one. And she's a shark. You're going to need him. I turned my back on him, a clear, final dismissal, and stared out the window at the bleak, gray sky. He stood there for a long moment, his ragged, panicked breathing filling the silence. Then, with a choked sound of impotent rage, he turned and stormed from the room, slamming the door so hard that a framed design award I'd won fell from the wall and shattered on the floor. I didn't move. I just stood there, listening to his footsteps fade, listening to the sound of our life breaking. And in the ringing silence that followed, I took my first deep, steadying, truly free breath in months. The war had begun. The divorce was not a proceeding. It was a scorched earth campaign. Mark, true to his nature, hired a legal pit bull from a top-tier New York firm, a notoriously aggressive attorney named David Chen, a man whose reputation was built on tearing spouses apart on the stand. Their opening salvo, as expected, was a vicious, coordinated attack on my character. They tried to paint me as unstable, vindictive, a failed artist who was bitter about her husband's success and was trying to extort him. They characterized his affair as a brief and regrettable lapse in judgment, and my reaction as disproportionate and hysterical. The courtroom felt like a hostile, alien planet. The air was thick with tension, the fluorescent lights sterile and unforgiving. Being cross-examined by David Chen was a brutal experience. He twisted my words, questioned my motives, prodded at my deepest insecurities. He tried to make me seem crazy, but every time I felt my resolve start to waver, every time I felt the sting of his attacks, I would look over at Evelyn. She sat beside me, a bastion of unshakable calm, occasionally giving me a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Her presence was my armor, her quiet confidence, my shield. The trial had several pivotal cinematic turning points, each one a dramatic act in the theater of our imploding marriage. The first was my doctor's testimony. Dr. Evans, a kind, professional woman in her 50s, explained the chlamydia diagnosis, the necessary course of treatment, and the long-term implications, the potential for future fertility issues, in clear, calm, clinical terms. The jury, a cross-section of ordinary Connecticut citizens, listened with grim, focused faces. I saw two of the women on the jury exchange a look of profound, undisguised disgust in Mark's direction. He sat at the defendant's table, staring at his hands, his face a mask of stone, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The second turning point was Evelyn's masterful cross-examination of Mark himself. She was a surgeon with a scalpel, slowly and methodically dismantling his story, his character, his lies. When she asked him, her voice dripping with a quiet, lethal contempt, if he had used protection during his affair with his lover, his pathetic, mumbled "no" echoed in the silent courtroom, like a confession to a much greater crime than infidelity. It was an admission of a profound and selfish disregard for my life. The third, and most spectacular turning point was the presentation of the financial evidence. Evelyn called a forensic accountant to the stand, a meticulous, dapper man who presented large, clear, easy-to-read charts and graphs. They detailed the undeniable flow of money from our joint accounts into Mark's secret, illegal fund. It was irrefutable, undeniable evidence of his calculated intent to defraud me. Mark's lawyer, David Chen, objected repeatedly, his voice growing more desperate and shrill with each overruled objection from the judge. Judge Peterson, a formidable, no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with a reputation for being tough but fair, looked at Mark with an expression of open, undisguised contempt. But the true emotional climax of the trial was my own testimony. When Evelyn called my name, my heart felt like a frantic bird trapped in my chest. But as I walked to the witness stand, swore the oath, and sat down, a strange, preternatural calm descended over me. This was my stage. This was my chance to finally tell my story, in my own words. Evelyn gently, expertly guided me through the narrative, from the devastating discovery of the first text message, to the soul-crushing phone call from my doctor, to the cold, late-night discovery of his financial betrayal. I spoke clearly, without histrionics, my voice filled with the quiet, powerful, undeniable weight of the truth. I looked directly at the jury, and I looked directly at Judge Peterson, and I told them what it felt like to have your life, your trust, your health, and your future stolen from you by the one person on earth who was supposed to protect them. Then came the cross-examination. David Chen came at me with everything he had. He was aggressive, condescending, trying to twist my words and paint me as a liar. He tried to suggest I was promiscuous, that I could have contracted the disease from someone else. But I was ready. Evelyn had prepared me for this. I met every attack with a calm, firm, fact-based response. When he tried to corner me, I stood my ground. I did not cry. I did not shout. I simply told the truth. By the end of his questioning, he looked flustered, and I felt a surge of empowerment so profound it was almost dizzying. I had not just survived his attack, I had won. The final day of the trial arrived. I wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress, a color that projected seriousness and strength. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my back ramrod straight, my hands folded calmly in my lap. The entire room was thick with anticipation. Judge Peterson entered, and the room fell silent. She put on her reading glasses, looked down at the lengthy document in front of her, and began to read her judgment. She granted the divorce on the grounds of adultery. Then she turned to the heart of the matter, the division of our life's assets. "This court," she began, her voice ringing with a clear judicial authority that filled every corner of the room, "finds Mr. Thompson's conduct in this marriage to be not merely unfortunate, but utterly and profoundly reprehensible. His actions demonstrate a pattern of deep-seated deceit, a callous and reckless endangerment of his spouse's physical and emotional health, and a calculated, fraudulent attempt to conceal significant marital assets. To simply divide the assets equally would not constitute an equitable or just outcome. It would, in fact, serve to reward Mr. Thompson for his egregious behavior." She paused, looking over her glasses directly at Mark. "That is something this court will not do." My breath caught in my throat. My hand found Evelyn's under the table. "Therefore," the judge continued, her voice firm and decisive, "this court orders the following. The marital home in West Hartford is to be sold immediately, with 80% of the net proceeds awarded to the plaintiff, Mrs. Thompson. The entire balance of the concealed Charles Schwab investment account, totaling $117,423.14, is to be transferred in its entirety to Mrs. Thompson within 30 days. Furthermore, in light of the significant physical and emotional distress caused, this court orders Mr. Thompson to pay both rehabilitative and punitive alimony to Mrs. Thompson in the amount of $5,000 per month for a period of 7 years. It was a complete and total annihilation. It was a landslide victory. It was more than I had ever dared to hope for. It was a legal and financial validation of every ounce of pain I had endured. Mark sat there, utterly defeated, his handsome face pale and slack, his mouth slightly agape. His expensive pit bull lawyer was shuffling his papers, avoiding his client's stunned gaze, his own face a mask of disbelief. As we walked out of the courthouse, the bright, crisp Connecticut sun felt warmer than it had in a year. I felt the crushing weight of the last 12 months lift from my shoulders, a physical sensation of unburdening. Evelyn turned to me, a rare, genuine smile touching her lips. "Justice, Sarah," she said quietly, her voice filled with a fierce satisfaction. "It doesn't always happen. But today, it did." Tears filled my eyes, but for the first time in a very long time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated relief and vindication. It was never just about the money. It was about justice. It was about an impartial court of law, affirming that what he did was not just wrong, it was reprehensible, and that in a just world, such actions have profound and lasting consequences. The aftermath was the slow, messy, but ultimately cleansing process of disentanglement. Mark moved out of the house, his life's possessions, his bespoke suits, his expensive watches, his leather-bound books, ignominiously packed into cardboard boxes. Watching the moving truck pull away from the curb was like watching my old life being hauled away to the dump. The house, our beautiful home, the canvas of our shared life, was sold quickly. He fought the court order, of course, filing pathetic, desperate motions and appeals, but Evelyn, my tireless warrior, was there every step of the way, shutting down every attempt with brutal, legal efficiency. I heard through the grapevine that his career had stalled, that his partners at the firm, valuing reputation above all else, were quietly pushing him out. His affair with Jessica had fizzled out as soon as the money dried up. He was left alone, in a small rental apartment, to face the ruins of the life he had so carelessly torched. With the settlement, I began the careful, deliberate process of building my new life. I didn't want a big house anymore. I wanted a home. I bought a small, sun-drenched cottage on the shoreline in the charming town of Madison, a place that smelled of salt air and new beginnings. It had a wraparound porch perfect for watching storms roll in over the ocean, and a small, wild garden that I filled with lavender, unruly rose bushes, and, of course, hydrangeas. I poured my renewed energy and focus into my design work, and my business flourished in ways I had never imagined. I adopted a scruffy, perpetually cheerful terrier from a local shelter, a little dog named Gus, whose unconditional love and steadfast companionship became a daily balm to my healing soul. Healing is not a destination, it's a journey. There were days when the grief would ambush me unexpectedly, a song on the radio, a familiar scent, triggering a wave of sadness for the life I had lost, for the man I thought I had married. The phantom limb of my old life would ache. But there were more good days than bad. Days filled with the rhythmic sound of the ocean, the warmth of the sun on my porch, the quiet, deep satisfaction of my work, and the steadfast, uncomplicated love of a good dog. About a year after the divorce was finalized, Emily came to visit my new cottage for the weekend. We sat on my porch, wrapped in old, soft quilts, drinking a crisp Sauvignon Blanc as the sun began its slow, spectacular descent over the Long Island Sound, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink. Gus was curled up at my feet, his soft snores a comforting, rhythmic counterpoint to the gentle lapping of the waves. Emily raised her glass, her eyes shining in the beautiful, fading light. "To Sarah," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "the comeback queen, the woman who walked through the deepest circle of hell and came out on the other side, not just a survivor, but a goddamn dragon." I laughed, a real, deep, genuine laugh that came from the bottom of my soul. I clinked my glass against hers. "To new beginnings," I said. The future was no longer a terrifying, empty void. It was a blank canvas, bright with infinite, breathtaking possibility. I had been a wife. I had been a victim. But now, I was simply myself, stronger, wiser, and finally, gloriously, breathtakingly free.